Okay, today we're talking axles. So on my Volkswagen I have a late gearbox with early 60s swing axle short axles. Now this setup today is going to be pretty much a stock setup for Nearly Bug because I'm using stock brakes and everything all the way to the gearbox. So I'm going to show you how to construct your bearings and spacers and bearing caps and all the rest of the pieces in the right order for a stock setup. But also we're going to be covering potentially using non-standard spacers if you're going to be fitting such as a Type 3 drum onto your long axled 4-stud bug, for example. So you may use different spacers if that's the case, and I'll show you how to calculate that and what spacers you need. And also I'm going to cover bearing caps because not all bearing caps are equal. They do vary over the years. You need to make sure you get the right ones, and I'll show you how to measure for that. And there is a small online issue with 11.5mm inner spacers which don't seem to exist, but I shall explain later. Let's do it. So if you bought axles but you don't have bearing caps, you need to make sure you get the right ones. Bearing caps came in different sizes depending which axles you're using. So these are the ones I'm using today. These are early 60s ones, so I think it's 58 to 64, these ones. Now they don't have the oil drain hole in there, and also you can fit the seal from the inside or outside, so it's less well retained. The later ones have an oil drain hole at the bottom here, you can see that, and basically if oil gets past your seal, it comes into the front of it here, it goes down the little hole and then out through the back plate, so it doesn't contaminate your brakes should you get any oil past the seal. So they're considered an upgrade if you can use them. I'm breaking out the vernier, so it must be getting serious. So firstly we need to know how wide our wheel bearing is, and that should be 19mm. We need to know the depth of the recess on the end of our axle. That measures about 10mm. Then we need to know the depth of the recess on our bearing cap. 9mm. So our 9mm on our cap, our 10mm on our axle is perfect for our 19mm bearing. On the end of your axle here is a little lip. Now this lip stands proud by about 4.5mm. And on this lip sits your back plate. Now this is an aftermarket back plate, and it actually measures about 5mm thick. So it's actually about 1/2 mil thicker than the lip stands proud. Now if we put our bearing, and now we're all the spacers and bearings in place, eventually we're going to be fitting a rubber seal around here. Now I'm not sure if it's because the aftermarket back plate is slightly too thick, but I'm assuming that small 1/2mm is so that that seal that goes around there doesn't completely crush. So it sits within the beveled part in here and against the edge there, and it should totally seal without being destroyed. So I have seen online people saying you have to include the thickness of the back plate into working out which caps and axle combination you need to use, and that's not true. So if you include the 5mm back plate into this, you can end up with potentially the bearing moving in and out by 4.5mm or more. So you do not include the back plate when you're measuring the recess in the axle and the recess in your caps to find out which is the correct ones to use. Measuring these laser caps, these seem to measure about 8.22mm, so it's tricky trying to get an accurate measure on this one. So it looks like about an 8mm recess on there, and this one is much shallower. It measures about 6mm. So before we construct the rest of the axle and the bearings and the spacers together, I just want to talk about if you're using non-standard parts, such as a wide 5 splitty drum. So this is the snub taken down so it will fit on a bug axle. Now you probably have to use the long axles for that because I think you're pretty limited with what you can do with the shorter axles, but it might be something you consider with your longer axled Beetle. Or you might also be considering Type 3 drums. Again, they're a wider drum, so say it's 50mm wide, so it takes I think it's the 48mm shoes. I'm not sure how wide they are, a bit wider. But it's considered a braking upgrade, so it's something you might be looking at fitting. But if you do that, you're going to have to change the spacers you use on your axle, and that's why the following calculation I'm about to show you is important. So if we're using non-standard drums, we want to know the length of our spline section here. So from the stop there on the axle to the end of the splines here. So in my case, on these particular short ones, short axles, we're looking about 85 millimeters. So I'm going to construct this quickly without using any seals, just because I want to show you the measurement. The first thing you're going to be putting on there is your inner spacer. That is 6.5 millimeters, but we will talk about that shortly. Next will be your bearing, which is 19 millimeters. You have a spacer, a washer on there, that's 0.5 millimeter. Your outer spacer is 15.5 millimeters, and then you're going to be putting your drum on. My drum measures 48 millimeters from the snub there to the inside. So basically all those calculations together comes to 89.5. So 89.5 on our 85 mil spline, if you remember, means that the drum will end about 5 mil past the end of the splines, and that is perfect. So it wants to be with a bend about 5 mils of there. So basically you want to be able to get your nut onto the end of the axle, and you've got to get the pin through the castellated part of the nut. So if you've got more than 5 mil sticking out here, you're going to struggle to get your nut on far enough. If it's too short and the splines are sticking out, the nut's going to bottom out on the splines, and you're not going to be able to tighten up the drum. So it's going to be insecure, and that won't work either. So you've kind of got that Goldilocks zone, that 5 mil at the end of the splines, where you're aiming for your drum to end. So just to prove I can do basic maths, our spline length 85, inner spacer 6.5, 19 mil wheel bearing, the washer's 0.5, and the outer spacer 15.5. So those parts come to 41.5 millimeters, and our drum is 48 millimeters. So 41.5 and 48 millimeters is 89.5 millimeters, which is 4.5 mil longer than our total spline length. So we're in that 5 mil Goldilocks zone where we want to be. I did look at using a wider drum on here, but the drum was 63 millimeters wide from the outer snub to the inside. So that was a total of 104, and 104 on an 85 mil spline ain't gonna work. So I couldn't use the wider drums. So stock drums for the win, and all stock parts, including the 6.5 mil inner spacer. So if you have long axles and using one of the earlier drums we just talked about, the chances are you're going to have too much spline. So you might want to increase the width of your inner spacer. Now, all the inner spacers I've ever found, including all these ones in my big box of random parts, are 6.5 millimeters. So stock from the factory, an inner spacer is 6.5 millimeters. This one is stamped just to prove it's a genuine Volkswagen one. Now, you may find on supplier websites a 11.5 millimeter inner spacer that's been listed. Now, I first came across this issue about 10 years ago. So no matter how many times I ordered an 11.5 millimeter spacer, a 6.5 came. No one seemed to actually have what they had listed on the websites in stock. And I tried multiple people. I actually bought, I think, 3 sets back then, trying to find the correct spacer I wanted, and they don't seem to exist. Now, the project kind of came to a halt at that point, and I gave up, and I've just come back to it all this time later, and I still can't get hold of an 11.5 mil spacer from the major suppliers. They just don't seem to exist. And in actual fact, after this latest hunt for one of the big suppliers has actually just changed on their website to the correct measurement. So the ones I received this time were actually 7 millimeters, so slightly wider than these, but that wouldn't cause any problem. As I say, you've got that Goldilocks zone, so you have a little bit of play to play with. So basically, if you need to put a wider inner spacer on to step your drums back away from the axle a little bit further, unfortunately you're going to have to get something custom made. So I believe these ones were custom made. These are actually 10 mil, and these were actually made for that very purpose, to fit the wide 5 drums onto some axles I had. Unfortunately, I'm not sure which axles they were exactly, because I no longer have them. But say, if you are looking at having wider spacers, you may have to have them custom made. All the outer spacers are 15.5 as far as I know. So for all years it should be 15.5. And as far as I know, and according to all the major suppliers I've talked to, a 6.5 to 7 millimeter inner spacer is correct all the way back to 1950. I don't have their little magic books, but they checked in their books and their books of words and their magic things online. I don't know where they look, but they all confirmed that back to 1950 the 6.5 is actually correct. All the new parts I'm using today, including the new drums, the seal kits, And the bearing caps have all come from Cool Air VW. If you use the PeoplesCar discount code on the website, you will get yourself a 5% discount. That's not an affiliate link, I don't earn money from that. I actually use the same discount code myself to keep the prices down a bit. But I can't thank Cool Air enough. They've been really helpful over the last couple of months, identifying some bits and pieces, because I'm mashing random years parts together and just helping me make sure I don't buy the wrong thing. They've been absolutely superb and I can't recommend them enough. So that's Cool Air VW. Thanks guys. Alright, let's construct this axle. So it's all been lightly greased just to help things slide together, and a very lightly grease the bits I'm putting on. So it just helps construction. So first thing that goes on is our inner spacer. That's a 6.5mm one. It's got a beveled edge on the inside, and that goes towards the gearbox, like so. Next goes our bearing. Now, those that are observant will notice I've way overpacked that bearing. Now, normally you wouldn't have to overpack the bearing because it's actually in oil from the gearbox. It comes through the tube. However, this bearing is going to be quite starved of oil because I plan on having the car very low and the axles are going to be pointing uphill. So it's going to get oil starved quite badly. So I've just chosen to pack it with as much grease as I can get in there. So we may have to drift this down. If it's not going to go down. You're going to go down? Oh, we went down. Excellent stuff. Now, some of the bearings you get, like this one, have a plastic cage. So this one doesn't have that. It's a metal cage in the centre. But if it has a plastic cage on the outside like that, it's bearings on the other side. I believe it's supposed to be plastic side on the outside, so you've got easier access to oil to the bearings. I don't think it makes any difference, and no car or axle I've ever taken apart that somebody else has built has ever been fitted that way around. So I don't think it's a problem really. Also, if you're going to be using an extraction tool like the one we made in the previous video, which I'll put a link to up at the top, and you put it on that way, you're going to have real trouble getting it back off again. So my recommendation is probably put it in the wrong way, and I don't genuinely think it'll make any difference at all to oil getting past all those gaps. It's going to get through either way. But that's just my opinion. You might want to do it properly. I'll leave it with you. Next goes the washer from the seal kit, which looks identical to the one that's come off, so we're going to use the new one. Then the O-ring from the seal kit goes next against the back of the washer. Get in there, you. Then your outer spacer. So again, it's beveled edge on the inside. That goes towards the gearbox and towards the seal. Then we take our back plates, and that should just pop on nicely. It can be a little bit tight with the new aftermarket ones. We take our seals. Now, there's a little hole in the bottom of these. Some of them are punched out and some of them aren't. Obviously, if you're using a drain bearing cap, you want to take the hole out so the oil can flow out of it. You get 2 in a kit. You can use 1 or 2. I'm going to use 2, just because I feel like it. The big seal goes around the outside of the bearing. Just lightly grease your seal, hope it get it into your cap. If you're using the 60s one like this, you'll probably find it's easier to fit it from the outside. The reason being is you've got a lot more surface on the seal to press against with your thumbs. It should just pop in. If you're using the later caps, you have to press it on from the inside. You might want to get something like a big socket or something to help press it down. It can be a little bit more tricky. This one should just pop in with a bit of patience. Come on. And I'm just going to push it so it's just inside the edge of the bearing cap by 1/2 mil. So you don't want it standing proud, just wants to be just inside very slightly. Like so. If you're using a later style bearing cap like this one, you're going to be pressing the seal in from the inside. It's a little bit trickier because it kind of pulls apart as you use your thumbs. It's not as easy from the inside, so you may need to get something like a little socket and just tap it down gently. so it sits in nice and evenly. Before you do that, you need to fit the washer that comes in your seal kit, the big washer. So that goes before the seal. It's wibbly wobbly in there, look. Then your seal goes in second, and then just make sure the seal sits all the way down to the bottom of the recess where it needs to sit in there. So it has to go all the way in, and job should be done. The curvy part goes facing down. Obviously, if you've got a drain cap, you want the drain hole facing down. You can see the shape of it there as well. Are you going to go on? Oh, nice and easy today. Excellent stuff. Copper grease those bad boys. Just hold it all together so it doesn't fall off while you're doing it. Could be a little bit fiddly getting it through, lining everything up. Eventually, there she blows. Do them in diagonals. And you want to tighten these down to 43 foot-pounds. Job's a good one. Right, I've still got the brakes to construct. We may do that in a future video. I thought we'd just put the drum on to make sure everything goes together as it should do. I treat myself to an early bug nut, which looks like that. That's a later one, which is the more common one most people probably know. But I thought I'd treat myself to a correct nut for the correct year. Wouldn't want to mix up wrong year parts, would I? Right, loosely nip that down. There we go, and we can see the pinhole for the split pin. So job is good. Hope you found that useful, guys. Take care. Bye bye.